All right, welcome to our next lesson on human anatomy. This is our third week, so we're focusing on parts of the body. We're focusing on the cardiovascular system and the nervous system today. So these are our two systems that we're focusing on today. So we're going to do the cardiovascular system first. Here's our two warm-up questions. What are the different parts of the cardiovascular system, and what is the purpose of the cardiovascular system? What do we got? Ladies, feel free to unmute yourself and tell me what you think. What do we see? What are the different parts?
What is the purpose of the cardiovascular system? Oxygen.
Okay, yes, we need that oxygen, the O2. I'm going to use the chemistry form. Yep, oxygen, getting oxygen through our whole body. All right, what else?
Nutrients.
Yep, getting all those nutrients.
Blood.
Those nutrients.
The heart.
Yep, we see blood, definitely. We see the heart right there. Anything else? All right, we're going to focus on all these different parts of our cardiovascular system and look at their different purposes. Here are all the different things we see in the cardiovascular system. Blood, the heart. We focus on the right side of the heart and the left side of our heart. We have blood vessels, arteries, capillaries, and veins. These should be familiar to most of us. Are there any of them that jump out where you're like, I have no idea what that means?
Capillaries. What is that?
Okay.
Whoops.
The capillaries. All right, we will get to that too. These are going to be like the really, really small. They're kind of like blood vessels, but a lot smaller. So we saw them last week when we were talking about the lungs, how at the smallest part of the lung, we had those really, really tiny blood vessels that are actually capillaries. These they're like really small blood vessels, the smallest ones. What else we got? Do we know the difference between an artery and a vein? Or blood vessel? And what do we know about the different chambers of the heart? We talk about the right side and the left side of the heart. Do we know what the purposes of the different sides of the heart are?
One's pumping blood in and out.
Okay, so in and out. Okay.
The right side pumps in, or yeah.
One is for the good stuff, one is for the bad stuff. Or
okay, one's for the good stuff, right? All right, we're getting
not
all the good
bad,
stuff.
But all the
yeah, the stuff we're getting rid of, right? The stuff we don't need,
Yep.
right? The excess stuff, and some of it is bad, right? Like the CO2, carbon dioxide. Running backwards today. CO2, that carbon dioxide, right? We're definitely getting that out of our system. And we talked about that with the respiratory system that we breathe out. All right, well, let's take a closer look. We're going to start with blood, and blood is made up of these four things that we're always looking at. We're looking at plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Let's talk about plasma. What do we know about plasma? Anybody? Plasma is kind of the stuff between, because in this picture here, we see the red blood cells, we see the white blood cells. Plasma is kind of the stuff in between, right? It's what most of blood is made up of, is that plasma. We have red blood cells and we have white blood cells. What are these jobs? What do they do? What do red blood cells do? And what do white blood cells do? Do we know?
Red blood cells carry oxygen.
Yes, yep. Our red blood cells is going to be carrying all of the stuff, right? Good stuff and bad stuff, right? They do the nutrients, they do the oxygen, they do the carbon dioxide, and they're the ones carrying that around throughout the entire body. What do white blood cells do?
They protect the body from like
Yep.
infection.
Yes, they protect the body. So they're kind of like soldiers, right? That protect the body and fight it off. And then platelets is another thing that we talk about. Platelets is what kind of keeps blood together and what keeps blood from clotting. So if we ever have a breach in our system where we're bleeding, eventually it stops bleeding because those platelets come together and they clot. That once they're oxygenized, they clot and then they actually like close up that wound. And so platelets are really important in healthcare. We measure platelets and how quickly blood clots because that affects a lot of things. Like if someone's going into surgery, we need to know that their platelets are healthy so that when they're doing operations that they know that the injury will heal itself, that it'll stop bleeding when they need them to stop bleeding, and that the blood will do its job of protecting itself. So those are platelets. It has to deal with blood clotting once you're bleeding. All right, so those are platelets. When we talk about blood, we have about 1.5 gallons of blood in our body going through, and that's 10% of our weight. So think about like a gallon of milk. We have 1.5 gallons of blood going through our body at any given time. That number seems really high to me. All right. And the next question is like different types of blood. And this is really important too, that in healthcare, when we're working with patients, they're always like, well, what blood type? Do we know what types of blood there is? There are different blood types. We use letters to represent them. What do we know?
There's A's, B O's, positives and negatives.
All right, we have positives and negatives. So someone can be A positive or A negative, B positive, B negative, and O positive, O negative. Anything else?
Yeah.
There's one more we're missing.
I can't remember that one.
What else? It's actually a combination of A and B. So it is AB. And that can be AB positive or AB negative. So there are 4 types of blood, 4 blood types, and then they can be either positive or negative. Here's a video that's explaining why there are those differences, and it has to do with genetics. That it has to do with our red blood cells, what our red blood cells are made up of, and then our genetics. And if you remember from our genetics unit, how we get 50% of our genes from one parent and 50% from the other, we're getting our blood type from our parents as well too. So it's going to be a combination of those two, make those 4 outcomes. Let's watch this video.
It's often said that despite humanity's many conflicts, we all bleed the same blood. It's a nice thought, but not quite accurate. In fact, our blood comes in a few different varieties. Our red blood cells contain a protein called hemoglobin that binds to oxygen, allowing the cells to transport it throughout the body. But they also have another kind of complex protein on the outside of the cell membrane. These proteins, known as antigens, communicate with white blood cells, immune cells that protect against infection. Antigens serve as identifying markers, allowing the immune system to recognize your body's own cells without attacking them as foreign bodies. The 2 main kinds of antigens, A and B, determine your blood type. But how do we get 4 blood types from only 2 antigens? Well, the antigens are coded for by 3 different alleles, varieties of a particular gene. While the A and B alleles code for A and B antigens, the O allele codes for neither. And because we inherit one copy of each gene from each parent, every individual has 2 alleles determining blood type. When these happen to be different, one overrides the other depending on their relative dominance. For blood types, the A and B alleles are both dominant, while O is recessive. So A and A gives you type A blood, while B and B gives you type B. If you inherit one of each, the resulting codominance will produce both A and B antigens, which is type AB. The O allele is recessive, so either of the others will override it when they're paired, resulting in either type A or type B. But if you happen to inherit 2 O's, instructions will be expressed that make blood cells without the A or the B antigen. Because of these interactions, knowing both parents' blood types lets us predict the relative probability of their children's blood types. Why do blood types matter? For blood transfusions, finding the correct one is a matter of life and death. If someone with type A blood is given type B blood, or vice versa, their antibodies will reject the foreign antigens and attack them, potentially causing the transfused blood to clot. But because people with type AB blood produce both A and B antigens, they don't make antibodies against them, so they will recognize either as safe, making them universal recipients. On the other hand, people with blood type O do not produce either antigen, which makes them universal donors, but will cause their immune system to make antibodies that reject any other blood type. Unfortunately, matching donors and recipients is a bit more complicated due to additional antigen systems, particularly the Rh factor, named after the rhesus monkeys in which it was first isolated. Rh plus or Rh minus refers to the presence or absence of the D antigen of the Rh blood group system. And in addition to impeding some blood transfusions, it can cause severe complications in pregnancy. If an Rh negative mother is carrying an Rh positive child, her body will produce Rh antibodies that may cross the placenta and attack the fetus, a condition known as hemolytic disease of the newborn. Some cultures believe blood type to be associated with personality, though this is not supported by science. And though the proportions of different blood types vary between human populations, scientists aren't sure why they evolved, perhaps as protection against blood-borne diseases, or due to random genetic drift. Finally, different species have different sets of antigens. In fact, the 4 main blood types shared by us apes seem paltry in comparison to the 13 types found in dogs.
Man, could you imagine being a veterinarian and having to keep track of 13 different blood types working with animals?
I'm glad humans have so little.
Right? Just 4 of them. And so, again, this video is talking about that idea of donating, right, and recipients, which is something we have to be really aware of, that when a person has lost a lot of blood and they need blood into their system, hospitals can do that, but they have to first check to see what blood do they have, what does this recipient blood have, and who they can get it from. And like they were saying, O negative is the universal donor, because O negative can go to anybody, right? Anybody can receive O negative blood, but AB positive can only receive AB positive. So AB positive is the least restrictive, O negative is the most when you're talking about giving. No, I take that back. AB positive can receive any of them. It's O negative. O negative can only receive O negative. So if you have O negative, it's kind of like a blessing and a curse, because if you have O negative blood, you can give it to anybody. right? You can give it to anybody. But if you have O negative blood, you can only receive it from another O negative person. That's why people with O negative blood are often really encouraged to donate blood, because it is it's such a rare blood type and very useful and beneficial. When we look at the percents of how popular they are, that O negative is only 13% of the people have that O negative. Most people, 30%, I shouldn't say most, but the largest is 30%, which is A positive. And then these are the least frequent, would be B negative, OB positive, and OB negative. All right, any questions about that? Any questions? Does that make sense? Are we good on blood types?
Yep.
Do you know what your blood type is?
Not officially, nope.
Mm-hmm.
A positive.
Very good. Anyone else? It is a handy thing to know and to mark it down, because it's but even though, I don't know, on some cases people say it's really important that you should know. That's a good thing to know, that in case there is an emergency, you can let them know. But medical providers, if you go to the hospital and you need a blood transfusion, the first thing they're going to do is test your blood before they give you anything. Even if you tell them, I'm A positive, they're going to check just to make sure, because it is detrimental on that you receive the right type of blood if you need a transfusion. So, all right, so that is our blood. The next thing we're going to talk about is the heart. So here's the different parts of our heart, and the heart is very complex. We could spend an entire year talking about the heart and the different things that are actually going on here. So kind of just the big brief information. We can split up the heart in two ways. We can look at it from the top and the bottom, that there's these top chambers and the bottom chambers. And this is why we have the heartbeat that we do, that the top will actually contract first, boom, and then the bottom one contracts, boom. So we get that boom, boom. That's what's giving our heartbeat, right? We have the top and then the bottom. We can also look at it from left and right. And that was like our one question, was what is the difference between the left side of our heart and our right side of our heart? And we can see where blood is coming from and where it's going. And so here I see the pulmonary vein, where it's going in to our heart here. Pulmonary vein, where's that coming from? What does pulmonary tell us? Pulmonary. Do you remember? It is about the lungs. Very good. This was one of our root words. When we see when we see this, it often is dealing with the lungs. So pulmonary is our lungs. And so our lung is over here. So here's our lung, right? And if blood is coming from the lung into the heart, tell me about that type of blood. What is it going to have a lot of? It's going to have a lot of O2, or is it going to have CO2?
O2.
It's going to have a lot more oxygen. Very good. That O2 is coming into our body. It comes into the heart. It comes from the lung into the heart. It goes down to the bottom chamber, and then it gets dispersed throughout the body and down this way. Then eventually it comes back, comes into the top chamber, down into the bottom, and then it goes to the pulmonary artery, to our lungs. Tell me about that blood, the blood that's leaving the right side of our heart and going to our lungs. And again, when it's right side, you have to think about their right? It's their right. When we say right side, it's their right, not us looking at it, because it's to the left for us, but it's their right side. Tell me about that blood. Coming from the right to the lungs, what is that blood going to have a lot of? O2 or CO2?
CO2.
We got it.
O2. Oh,
Yeah. Well, it's going to have a little bit of both too, but it's going to have a lot more higher levels of CO2, and that's getting it out of our system there. So it goes to the lungs, and then it fills up with fresh oxygen, and then it comes back and it starts that process. So it is a loop. It is a closed system, right? It's like a bunch of hoses that are all closed, and that's why we can maintain blood pressure. That this here is our motor, right? It is going boom, 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 and it's pushing that through our system. And since it's all closed and it's a closed circuit, that pressure can keep everything flowing at that constant pressure. All right, so again, comes in from the lungs into our heart. It gets then spread to the rest of our body. It then comes back into our heart there, and then it goes back out to the lungs, and that is our circuit. Does that make sense? Good. Does it, like I said, fairly simple. Did that make sense? So tell me, in your words, what is the difference between the right side of our heart here that's blue and the left side of our heart, which is red? What do those colors represent? Why do we use blue and red?
it's oxygen and yeah, O2 and CO2.
Yes, exactly. And that's why we use those different color systems, because this is the good stuff that all the nutrients are going into our body. It also goes a little bit slower. So all of the red ones go a little bit slower. These are our arteries. So our arteries are going to be these red ones, and they go a little bit slower, really taking the time to really spread all of that good stuff. And then wait, now I'm thinking if I have that backwards. Yep, and then our veins are the blue ones, and those go a little bit faster because it's trying to get the bad stuff out as quickly as possible. So it goes a little bit faster. So we have our arteries, and we have our blood vessels, oxygen, and our CO2. Other parts of our heart, this is a really important part called the apex and the wall of the heart. A lot of cardiologists are really interested in the wall of the heart, because a lot of people with heart issues, that is one of the major issues, is the wall, like the thickness of it, right? Because the more stress that we put on our heart, it'll actually make this sometimes get bigger and get thinner. And so the wall of the heart gets thinner because of that stress that it's being put on. So that is one issue that doctors are really concerned about, is the actual wall of the heart. And the other thing that they're really interested in, these here called valves, that there are these valves that allow things to go in, but then it doesn't allow it to go out, right? There's these little flaps that allow things to go in, and then it closes and it doesn't allow anything to go out. And those are really important too, because if there's any type of an issue with the valve, that's going to lead to heart issues. Or if things start getting clogged or clumped, and that's where we start talking about like heart disease. They start really looking at levels of cholesterol and plaque and all of those things that can kind of build up and cause blockages and different issues. They're really interested in valves as well. Are those valves clear? Are they allowing blood to flow through them properly? Some children are born with issues with the valve where it's not working properly, and that's an issue where they might need a heart transplant because there's a certain part of the heart that's not working properly. And it's often the valves and the wall of the heart. Any other questions about the heart? Any questions?
Nope.
Here's that same thing. So again, like we're saying, that good stuff is coming in from the lung, going in, and then it spreads out throughout the body. It eventually comes back, goes into the heart, and then pushes back out into the lungs. And notice how it is going to both sides, right? That it goes to both the left and the right lung, and just like it comes in from both the left and the right lung, right? So both lungs are working. Both lungs have those veins and the arteries bringing in oxygen and then releasing carbon dioxide. Very complex system. Like I said, we could spend over a year talking about it. This is just kind of a brief introduction. So then going to blood vessels, this is what we're talking about. The red and the blue are all blood vessels. Blood vessels is kind of like the big term talking about all of them. Who would like to read our definition of blood vessels?
I can do it.
Okay, go ahead.
Blood vessels. Blood vessels are the channels or conduits through which blood is distributed to body tissues. The vessels make up two closed systems of tubes that begin and end at the heart. One system, the pulmonary vessels, transports blood from the right ventricles to the lungs and back to the left atrium.
Absolutely. So again, like I said, it's a closed system, and it goes in all the way to the heart. It leaves the heart, comes back in, and then goes to the lungs and back. All right. And so the different types are these different colors, the blues and the reds. First one we're going to talk about are the arteries. And these are our red ones, right? The oxygen-rich ones. Who would like to read about our arteries? Anybody?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Arteries. The arteries are the blood vessels that deliver oxygen-rich blood from the heart to the tissues of the body.
And so that is our O2 and our nutrients, all the good stuff going around. All right. Things to know about our arteries. I mean, especially as like EMTs or people who work in the ER, that we have 1.5 gallons of blood in our system. But the thing is that 1.5 gallons of blood goes through our entire system 3 times every minute. Think about that. 3 times every minute.
Wow.
That's a lot, right? I mean, it's pumping, right? Boom, 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 and it's going through our entire system, and it goes through the entire system 3 times every minute. So that means in 20 seconds, 1.5 gallons of blood is going through your system every 20 seconds. So now, what if there's some type of an emergency? What if someone gets into an accident and loses an arm, or cuts one of these arteries and they start losing blood? How quickly are they losing blood? Very quickly. And that's why when you talk to EMTs or people in emergency rooms, there is this first aid and safety of the first thing we need to do is stop the bleeding as much as possible, because that blood is moving so quickly through the system that if we have a major breach in one of these arteries, you have about 20 seconds to save their life, to stop that bleeding as quickly as possible. And so again, applying pressure slows down the bleeding. If we can help it start clotting as quickly as possible, like this is quick clot, so this will then stop it from clotting. Cauterizing it in like emergency situations where they burn it really quickly. You'll see that during surgeries too, that when they cut something, they'll often cauterize it too, which is burn it, which then stops it from bleeding. And then in emergency situations, they use tourniquets, which is like a tight band that they to then cut off that circulation as much as possible. So again, they try to cut off circulation to stop that bleeding. Any questions about this?
I never actually really thought about how fast it goes through the system. So it kind of makes more sense why you need tourniquets and all that.
And that's why they cut off the blood. So like in a lot of surgeries, they use clamps, right? And they'll actually like cut off the artery, or they'll cut off the blood vessel, right? To stop that blood flow, because it is going through so quickly. Absolutely. All right, so then our other one are veins. Veins are our blue ones. So tell me about the blue ones. What would they be doing? All right, here's a compare and contrast between the two. Who would like to read about veins?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the blue veins. They carry blood from the tissues of the body back to the heart. And the arteries carry blood away from the heart to the tissues from the body.
Yep. And a lot of that has to do because of the nutrients, right? That O2 and the CO2.
Okay. The veins are usually positioned closer beneath the surface of the skin. Okay. The arteries are usually positioned deeper within the body.
Mhm. And so these are the ones that we see, right? That if you actually look at your skin, right, you can actually see the blue veins, right? They're the ones closer to the surface of the
Mhm.
skin. Now that makes me think about like shots and injections. I think shots and injections go into veins. I
Yeah.
am pretty sure that, or when you're drawing blood, you're also drawing it from a vein too.
Mhm.
When people are when they're
And
doing when they're drawing your blood. Mhm,
some people have very small veins, and it becomes a problem.
mhm. I'm gonna double check that. I am not a phlebotomist. A phlebotomist is a person who works with blood. I stay away from blood. No, thank you. No, I would never do anything with blood.
Do I continue reading?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yep, go ahead. You can keep reading.
Veins are less muscular than arteries, but
Mhm.
veins contain valves to keep blood flowing in the right direction, usually toward the heart. Arteries are more muscular, which helps transport blood that is full of oxygen efficiently to the tissues. Veins would collapse if blood flow stops. Arteries would generally remain open if the blood flow stopped due to their thick muscular layer. Oh, right.
All right. And so, yeah, I just looked online and it is so when they're drawing blood, it is actually the veins, which makes sense too, because if you think about it, it's coming from the body to the heart. So it's picked up all of the bad stuff from your body. So when they do a blood draw, they are getting all of the stuff straight from the body. So it gives us the best results of what's going on, right? Because all of the toxins, all of the bad stuff, it's coming from your body, going there. So it's like the
Mhm.
freshest sample of what's going on. So blood draws are going for veins, the blue ones. Awesome. Any questions about this? I'm good. Any questions? All right, we will keep going. So again, these are the two, right? We have arteries, which are the red, veins, which are blue. And then our other word was capillaries, which are these really, really small ones, right? That they are these just small little connectors that we saw inside the lungs too, right? Because, I mean, we have blood everywhere. Like even if you pick your finger, right? You pick your finger and squeeze it, blood will come out. That's coming from a capillary, right? Those really, really small blood vessels, where your arteries and veins are definitely the bigger ones. All right. And so that is the cardiovascular system. We looked at all those different parts, the blood, the heart, blood vessels, arteries, and then all of the purposes. Any questions about that brief summary of our cardiovascular system? Any questions about that? And blood type. If not, we have our common illnesses. So here's our common illnesses. We have heart disease, which again, like I was talking about, often has to do with like the valves working properly in the heart, the wall of the heart, the thickness of the wall of the heart, the shape of it, also the speed, right? How is that heart rate? Do we have the tachycardia, the faster heart rate or a slower heart rate? What's going on? We have heart attack. Which is often there's some type of an issue, like something's either blocked. We also have stroke. Do we know the difference between a heart attack and stroke? What is the difference?
I always wondered myself.
Mm-hmm. A stroke is happening in the brain. And so they're very similar. They're caused by similar things. A stroke is in the blood going to our brain. There's some type of a block, right, in our carotid artery, right here in our neck. Oh, that was one thing we didn't talk about, the different types of arteries. I forgot something. Our main arteries to know of are carotid arteries, the one here in the neck. Our femoral artery is the one here in the leg, because again, in emergencies and accidents, this is the one to really worry about. It's kind of like on the inner thigh, that if someone got into a car accident or this one can often get cut. And then the ones in the arms as well, the brachial arteries there. We have our brachial arteries, our carotid artery, femoral arteries, our radial artery, somewhat on the inner side of our wrist there, is that way. So these are a type of arteries. So looking at strokes, stroke is affecting the carotid artery here, right? That blood is not getting to the brain, that there's some type of a clot in the brain, like a blood clot or plaque, something got up in there and is stopping blood flow to certain parts of the brain, and that's what causes a stroke. And we will look at the warning signs of a stroke, right? So we see balance, because our brain affects our balance, right? So you see this balance, vision, right? Because the brain isn't functioning properly, depending on where and what part of the brain is being deprived of the oxygen, vision, our face, right? You'll often see that one side of the face is like, they have no control over it and it just kind of like falls. One side of their body might become really weak. Their speech might get really jarbled and they feel like I don't have language anymore, because that's a part of our brain too. And if any of these things are happening, they're often warning signs of a stroke, that the brain isn't getting the blood flow and the oxygen that's needed.
So does it matter which side these things happen to the face or whatever?
Yes and no. So that tells you what part of the brain is being affected, right? Because our brain, and that's what we'll be moving on to next, is the brain itself. And so different parts of the brain do different things. For example, your vision is going to be the back part of your brain. And so if there's some type of a clot where the back of your brain isn't getting the blood flow that it needs, maybe you start seeing damage, because if it doesn't get enough oxygen, your brain tissue starts dying, right? Those neurons die because your brain is just a group of cells, those neuron cells, that need all those nutrients and oxygen. And if they don't get them within like 12 minutes, they start dying off really quickly. And so if you start seeing damage to the brain, that will affect processes like vision or language. Language is kind of here on the side. Hearing is in the middle, right under our ears. Balance is the back part here. And then the side of it often tells us what part of the brain too. So there's a term that we'll talk about when we get to the brain called contralateral. Our brain is contralateral, which means it switches sides. So the left side of our brain is actually controlling the right side of our body, and the right side of our brain is controlling the left side of our body. So if we lose all this sensation on the left side of our body, that means the clot is happening on the right side of the brain. So medical people are aware of that if they're seeing droopiness, like the eye, all this mobility on the left side, the clot has to be on the right side. So when they do the MRI and the CAT scan, they're really going to be focusing on that side, because they know it has to be somewhere on the opposite side of the body, because that's the way our brain works. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep. And so depending on what we see, we can tell what part of the brain is being affected, most likely. But it's often really difficult because the brain does a lot of different things, and we'll look at that next. So that's a stroke. Stroke is that blood flow is not getting to our brain. Heart attack is there is some type of an issue that the body is not getting what it needs, and so the heart starts increasing, and it increases and increases and increases to the point where it just like stops working, right? The heart stops, it's not beating anymore, because there's some type of a problem. Either valves are broken, or you don't have like heart attacks can be caused by a lot of things, like not enough blood, right? If they lose a lot of blood, eventually their heart will stop, which is a heart attack. There's a lot of different things that can cause the heart to stop working, and those will be all heart attacks. What we see in elderly individuals, it often has to do with blockages, like it's either plaque or the blood is not flowing, there's blocks or there's things going on, and that's what's causing a heart attack, is there might be a clot somewhere, and then it breaks free, and then it moves somewhere, and then it clogs, and then a certain part of your body isn't getting the blood flow that it needs. Or that clot can even make its way all the way into the heart, get into one of the valves, and like keep one of the valves open, or cause an issue that way. I know I'm making this sound, I'm making it sound really
different types
simple.
of heart attacks then?
I would say yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'm by no means an expert in this at all but I would assume yes, because heart attack is just that general term of the heart is not working, right? The heart is failing. And it can be caused by different things. So I think the medical field would probably have lists. But yeah, let me search, see what I can find. Types of heart attacks. Acute. So I just went to Healthline really quick. Let me pull this over here. So acute tells me that it means small. If something is acute, it's like smaller. There is a STEMI, a classic or major heart attack. A NSTEMI heart attack. CAS, silent heart attack without blockage. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of different, like I said, there's a lot of things that could be causing it and different things. A lot of the warning signs are the same because the body is not getting the levels of oxygen that it needs. And so when the body doesn't have the amount of oxygen that it needs, it first increases its heart rate, right? Because it's like, oh, we're obviously exercising, so we need to get more blood through our system. And then respiration also increases too. They start gasping and they feel like, I'm breathing, but I'm just not getting the oxygen because there's something going on where their body just isn't getting the oxygen levels. And it can get to the point where the person then passes out because the heart rate is either increased so much or they're breathing so much and they're just not getting enough oxygen. The brain tells the body to just shut down because that's like the safe, like to recover from whatever it's doing. And so a person often loses consciousness, the heart will stop. And then in the ER, they then have to try to get the heart starting again. They put them often on a respirator to increase that oxygen. They do compressions, pushing on the heart. They can also use a defibrillator and zap the heart to get it pumping again. But yeah, when someone goes into cardiac arrest, they only have minutes. I mean, I think it's like 12 minutes that if they can't get that person's heart up and running and going again and getting that blood circulating through their blood, and I think it's even like 5 to 12 minutes, a lot of damage has happened, especially to the brain, right? If blood is not getting to that brain, the brain will deteriorate really quickly. And that then, like, the person will be in a vegetative state. And so it's not a lot of time. That's why CPR is so popular, and they really promote that average citizens should learn CPR, because when there is an emergency and someone's having a heart attack like that, how long does it take for an EMT to get there? How long does it take for them to then take that person and then get them to the hospital, right? The people who are there can actually take action quicker and faster if they have that basic training of providing CPR. You see a lot of defibrillators in public too, like schools. Most schools, universities, and public buildings will have a defibrillator there that's manual operated, that you just take it out of the box and it tells you what to do. It gives you voice commands. You put it on the person, and then it actually checks to see if the heart's beating or not. And if the heart isn't beating, it'll actually try to zap and get that heart going. And you see a lot of those defibrillators in public too. Because again, it takes medical personnel too long. It just takes too much time to get there. That when we're talking about a system, right, that is pumping blood through our body, I mean, going back to that, 20 seconds, right? Every 20 seconds is vital. right? The body is used to getting a fresh source of blood every 20 seconds, right? That every minute is crucial. And so the more we can train civilians to perform CPR, the better for those heart attacks. Here are warning signs of a heart attack. Pain, tightness, right? That's often due to a lack of oxygen, right? That they're not getting that oxygen. The lungs are having to work harder and they feel that. Sometimes the blockage can be in the lungs themselves. And so they're breathing, but their body just isn't absorbing the oxygen or not getting rid of the carbon dioxide because just the lungs aren't getting the blood flow. That specific, the medical term for that is angina pectoralis, is that chest pain that people have. Another one is this like numbness and this like, you feel it in the left arm itself. And so, because that's where the blood goes from the heart to there. And so you definitely feel, you'll see a lot of patients that have, that are showing warning signs of a heart attack. They'll be like holding that arm and it's just like giving them problems. Lightheadedness, dizziness, sweating, shortness of breath. Doesn't, nausea, they don't feel well, something is definitely up. All right, any questions about the warning signs of a heart attack?
And I'm assuming it's just not all of the warning signs are there at once. It's
Correct.
just some.
Just some. Yeah. And sometimes people will have a heart attack and not really show any warning signs. It just happens so quickly. But then you'll see other ones that they'll have warning signs for minutes, right? Maybe even an hour before they actually go into cardiac arrest.
Does Sean, I have a question. Does heart attack happens in a younger people, like younger? Because before they said it's like older people is at risk, something like that, you know. Is there any something that happens in the younger one?
Yes, and that's where this like idea of heart disease comes in. Heart disease, they say, is a genetic condition that we pass it on, that it is actually hereditary, that it's in our genes. And there's certain people have a genetic code where they're more likely to have heart issues, heart defects, and heart attacks in their life. And that's why one of the questions they ask is, do you have any, heart disease in your family? Does your dad's side or your mom's side have any history of heart attacks or heart disease? Because we do know that heart disease is genetic. So people are more likely. And there have been young people that have had heart issues, like just poor circulation, really unhealthy diets, really overweight, obesity. There's a lot of factors that lead to heart attacks too. Smoking leads to heart attacks. Interesting enough, not flossing your teeth. If you floss your teeth, you drastically reduce the chances of having a heart attack.
Say what now?
Flossing your teeth. Flossing your teeth. Yep. Because think of all the blood vessels near your teeth. And if you don't floss your teeth, you have gingivitis, where your gums, itis is swelling, your gums are swelling, gingivitis, and you bleed, right? A lot of people with gingivitis, when you brush your teeth, it bleeds. That is allowing bad things, plaque and things, to enter your circulatory system.
We're gonna have to pause this class, so I'm gonna go floss my teeth.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna go floss your teeth right now. Absolutely. But dentists say that if you floss your teeth, you decrease your chances of a heart attack by like 10%. Like, it's huge just by flossing your teeth, because you decreases your chances of gingivitis and you decrease that bleeding of the gums. If you bleed a lot in your gums when you brush your teeth, that's kind of a bad sign that there's gingivitis. That by avoiding gingivitis, you decreases your chances of a heart attack. True story. The more you learn, right? And so that's, there's a lot of things that kind of cause it. So to go back to your question, Maurice, yes, it can happen in younger people. Not as much. It's definitely more common among older people, just because as we age, things start to stop working properly, right? I mean, that's part of the aging process, right? Like we saw that in the video, the video with the movie with Adam Williams. No, that's not his name.
Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, thank you. That was Patch Adams. He said in there that we're not preventing death, we're increasing the quality of life, because we can't prevent death, right? That people will eventually die as we age, the systems start to break down, and that the heart, being this vital, strong muscle, does have issues. And that's why we see it commonly among older people, because it just, there's just so many things that can go wrong. And we also have people living with kind of really terrible diets, right? Diets high in cholesterol, high in fats, high in lipids, alcohol consumption, have these triglycerides, right? That a lot of alcohol consumption can also lead to heart issues as well too. Smoking, drug usage, lack of exercise, all of those things. All right, any questions about our common illnesses and diseases with our cardiovascular system? So that is our cardiovascular system. We're going to move on to some good stuff here and look at the nervous system. So what are the different parts of our nervous system, and what is the purpose of our nervous system? What do we got? What do you think?
To feel things.
Oh, right, we feel things. Yep, those sensations, right? And what can we feel?
Pain.
Yep, so physical things like, ow, pain, like hot, cold, pain.
Physical, emotional.
Emotional too, like, oh, all that's happening in your brain, right? And this is something that in history we didn't know, because a lot of times people are like, oh, the heart, right? This is where you feel all those emotions. Is it really? Not really. It's actually your brain interpreting all of those things around you, and those brains are producing all of those feelings, happiness, joy. It produces all those chemicals of oxytocin, dopamine, adrenaline. All of those are being produced by your brain to be like, ah. What else we got? I used a lot of words already too. What are the different parts? We got this guy up here. Do we know this down here?
Is that spine?
Yes, it is the spine, the spinal cord. The spinal cord is part of our nervous system. Very, very important. Yep, we have all these nerves going all the way down here that kind of act like a highway. All right, here's what we got. We got the brain, the spinal cord, which make up what we call the central nervous system, right? That core. And then our peripheral nervous system, like peripheral vision, right? That off to the side is everything else that goes out from there. So we have our CNS, our central nervous system, and our PNS, our peripheral nervous system. All right, so we're going to look at all these things here and all the things that it does. So like I said, our central nervous system is just those main ones there. And then everything else here, right? Our sensory nerves, everything that we're sensing, either temperature, cold, wetness, dryness, all those sensations, lights, sounds, textures, all of that, right? And then also our motor neurons, which force us to move. All of this here. All right, so let's talk about neurons themselves. So neurons are cells, just like other cells in our body. We see all those parts, right? There's the nucleus to the cell, there are mitochondria, there's all of the things that we see in cells, but what make neurons so unique are these things called dendrites, which are these like little fingers kind of coming out, these little branches that are coming out. Also, they have what's called an axon, which other cells don't have. And then they have this part down here. So those little dendrites, those little fingers, allow for them to make connections with other neuron cells, and they communicate through this like electrical charge, and they communicate with each other, making this network, which is called a neural network, which are all these connections, right? They fire, and then it goes in and it fires, and it makes a chain that we have an input. And then it makes this go, I need to do something. And so then it sends an output. So there's always an input and an output to every neuron cell. And we have billions of them. Like our brain is this intensive network of connections, right? People always talk about computers, right? They're like, oh man, computers are like so much better than the human brain. Not really. If you actually look at the amount of connections that we have in our brain compared to a computer, not even comparable. Our brain is doing so many things all at the same time. We're just unaware of most of the things that it is doing. So looking at neurons, we talk about neurons firing. So the way neurons react is it's kind of like a binary code. They're either on or off, right? A neuron goes boom, or it just sits there. That's all that neurons do. They just fire. And so when we talk about neurons firing, they can fire two different ways. They can fire in number, like you have a bunch of neurons firing at the same time, like warning, 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 something's wrong. That would be something like painful, like really hot, right? You touch it, a lot of neurons just went boom all at once. Or we can talk about frequency, which means they go bang, 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 right? That they're like warning, warning, warning. So those are how neurons work, right? It's either a bunch of neurons firing or they're firing a lot. They're firing with a lot of frequency. And so if we think about something that's really like soft and light, that would be just a few neurons. If we feel something strong and sharp, it would be a lot of neurons firing more frequently. That's kind of like the difference between a sharp pain and throbbing pain, right? That, you know, and doctors will ask that too. They're like, well, how does it feel? Like if you touch it, this is like sharp pain. Well, it was a large number just shooting once, like, ow, I felt it, but now I don't feel it anymore. Otherwise, we feel this constant like boom, 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 boom would be more this idea of like the frequency of the neurons firing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, it is incredible to think that this like binary system, and that's why people compare it to a computer, because it is just like a computer. It's literally on, off, on, off. And that literally just firing that electrical message makes up all of our cognitive processes, everything that we do, which is unbelievable. And it's all those connections and all those firings. And that's why we say the human brain does so much more than a computer. All of those intensive connections and the combination of those connections literally makes your entire perception of the world. Everything you see, everything you hear, everything you feel, everything you touch, you taste, you smell, you think, everything that's going on in your consciousness and in your subconsciousness is all happening just by those neurons going boom, bang, bang, boom, bang, boom, boom, bang, bang, boom, bang. That's it. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that crazy?
Insane.
It's really, I mean, just, it's, you can't even understand how complex that system is. Just like a computer, right? And if you look at a computer code, it's all just zeros and ones, because that's what it is, right? Zero, it's off, one, it's on. Zero, off, one, it's on. And so when you look at binary computer code of 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, our nervous system's doing the same thing. We just do it 10 times faster. Like it's so much more quicker, faster, and effective than computers. So don't ever think like, oh, a computer's smarter than me. Not really. You're asked to do 20 million things more than what a computer is asked to do. Yes, a computer can do computational algebra faster than you can, but your brain is worried about more important things than algebra, right? Your brain is worried about getting your heart, regulating your glucose level. It's doing all of these things all at the same time and responding to all of these different stimulus externally and internally, right? I mean, last week we talked about blood sugar, it talked about digestion, all of those things your brain is doing. It is orchestrating all of that subconsciously without you even knowing it, allowing you to focus on things like thought, questions, cognitive, the idea of analyzing, synthesizing, persuasion, all of those things going on in our brain, your body's able to focus on because your subconscious brain takes care of all of the rest. How cool is that? I don't think I'm feeling the excitement that I feel.
There's no
All
way
right,
of
so
describing it.
there's no way of describing it. So let's look at the brain. We can look at the brain many different ways. So here are the parts of the brain. So kind of going back what we said about stroke, depending on what we see with the person, that kind of tells us what part of the brain, because different parts of the brain do different things. We have our frontal lobe, and that's kind of the logic center of our brain, right? It makes all of our decisions. It is that thinking and memory, that like the, that really thinking part of it. Is here the front part of our brain. The back part of our brain is our optical lobe, which is all about our vision, which is really interesting because where are your eyes?
In front of us.
Yep. And so your eyes are here, and it sends that all the way to the back of your brain, right? Those neurons, when they fire, it sends that message all the way to the back, right? Things are constantly traveling and flying all over. Different parts of our brain are firing at all times. There's kind of a myth. A lot of people say that, like, oh, we only use like 10% of our brain. Kind of. Only 10% of our brain is functioning at one given time because we're, you know what I mean? It's like boom, 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 right? We're using all of it, right? We see something, we interpret it, but it's not all happening at the same time, right? It's those sequences of firing that gives us all of that information in day-to-day analyze. It's all those zeros and those ones that tell us what's actually going on, just like a computer. Our brain is a supercomputer.
And every supercomputer, if it too much is on, it'll overload.
Exactly. And that's why our brain can only do so much at the same time, right? It can only do 10% because it can't, it'll overheat, it'll break down just like a computer will. Exactly. So that's our frontal lobe. We have our vision in our back. Our hearing is here in the middle. Notice that's really kind of close to the ears, right? So it's like that center part right there. We also then have language and touch kind of here. But then, so going to with this idea of connections, think about language, for example, and how our brain will make all these different connections. So for example, I'm going to write something here. All right, what do you see?
Shoes.
Oh my gosh, yeah, right, shoes. So when you saw that, this is what your brain did. First, it has to see it, right? It sees, so this part of your brain is like, all right, I see the red on the white, this means something. Then you start actually decoding it, being like, well, these are actually symbols. And these symbols, boom, are connected to sounds. So this starts firing. It's like, oh yeah, they're sounds, right? But this here goes the sh sound, and this goes the ooh sound, and this goes s, and I can put those sounds that I'm used to hearing together. But did you hear sounds? No, you just read it, right? You saw it, but your brain knows what I'm seeing equals sounds. And it knows that this goes sh, this goes ooh, and this goes s, and that there's this. So this also means that it's plural. So your frontal lobe is going, ooh, we're obviously talking about more than one. We're talking about two of them here. And then it connects that sound, sh, ooh, s, to an actual visual image of, oh, there's this little fuzzy thing that you put on your foot. It keeps you warm. There's these laces and you have to tie it, right? And then it makes all these connections. And all of that happened in like 0.002 seconds. Tell me your brain is not smarter than a computer.
It's smarter.
Right? And that's why our brain is making all of these connections super quickly. And that's why reading is so difficult, right? I'm kind of biased because I'm a reading teacher, but literacy is so difficult because all of these things, right? We see it, we hear it, we have to connect it to its meaning, but notice there's more than one meaning, right? There's so many words that have multiple meanings, and it's like there's deeper meanings. We're not always saying exactly what we mean, right? And so we're making all of these connections. And then there's the speaking part of it, right? Actually then saying the word, shoes, right? Because I even said, what do you see? And then what did you say? Shoes, like, right? Your body produced that sound. It made all those connections. It read it, it decoded it, it knew the sound of it, it connected it to the meaning of the language, and then you said it. Dum, 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 dum. All happening within milliseconds. Cool. So these are parts of our brain. The cerebellum is this small part down here, and that does a lot of bodily functions, balance, coordination. I think even the heart is kind of related in this section here. We have our brain stem, which is at the top, that goes all the way up into the center of the brain. It actually goes all the way up there, up into the center. There's our brain stem, and that's where a lot of those like vital things are happening: breathing, heart rate, managing your temperature. I mean, just think about that temperature control, right? It keeps your body at the same temperature. So it'll either heat up your body if you're cold or cool it down when you're hot, right? It's constantly testing and making adjustments. This part of your brain literally spends the entire day just going, make it warmer, make it colder, make it warmer, make it colder, make it warmer, make it colder, make it warmer, right? And it's making those mini adjustments to keep you at that homeostasis. And that's what it's doing all day, every day, nonstop, without you even being aware of it. Look at all the things that are going on. So that's one way we can look at the brain. We can also look at the brain in hemispheres. That we do know that there is 2 hemispheres, that when we're children, the hemispheres are a lot more connected and we're doing all that growing. And when we reach puberty, they actually develop into 2 separate hemispheres. And we know there's a lot of connection between these 2 hemispheres, right? That the right side of our brain is really what they talk about, like the creative, artistic side, right? It's all about images and pictures and beautiful and feelings. And it's very artsy and creative, where the left side of our brain is all about analytics, logic, facts, math, statistics. Language is also more on this side. And so this lets us know that if someone ever has a brain injury, right, if they have a brain injury to the left side of their brain, they're more likely to have issues with mathematical reasoning, logic, and language processing. If someone has a brain injury to the right side of their brain, it'll definitely affect things like spatial awareness, visual, the arts aspect, colors, identifying colors. And so we can predict what's kind of going on based on where they had gotten injured. Now, another myth. A lot of people think because of this that they're actually separated, and that is not true. They're actually connected. There's a part of the brain that actually goes just like this, right? That actually connects to the 2 hemispheres like a little bridge, and that's called the corpus callosum. Let me write that here. It's corpus, meaning body, callosum, big, like the Colosseum, maybe bridge. Corpus callosum, right? It's this big, and it connects the 2. And all of your brain is working all at once, right? That, we're making these connections. Like when we see, it goes back to our brain, which then goes here and it goes there. And we are making these connections. They do not work independently, right? We know that there are differences, but they're also connected, working at the same time. You can't actually separate the 2, and they're independent features. One person doesn't have, I mean, they do say like some people are more like developed on this side, like, oh, I'm a very logical mathematical person, so I must have a bigger left side of my brain. Not really. It's not bigger. You will have more connections. You might have nourished this part of your brain and made more connections and built a stronger neural network and neural pathways on this side of your brain. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bigger or better than the other side of your brain, because you're constantly using all of your brain at different times, making those connections, and they are connected to each other. The other term I wanted to talk about, I said earlier, is that idea of what is it called? Contralateral connection. Contralateral, meaning that it crosses our body, right? That what you're seeing in your right eye is actually being interpreted by the left side of your brain. And what you're seeing in your left eye is actually being interpreted by the right side of your brain. And same thing with movement, right? That if you are moving, your right side of your brain is sending those messages to move the left side of your hand. And the left side of your brain is moving the right side of your hand. So it's that contralateral. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this applies to the whole body as well?
Yep, whole body. Pretty much. That there is these, and that's like with the stroke thing, like you said, you'd see if you lose the left side of your body there's obviously something on the right side of the brain that's going wrong. Now, certain things, like when we say all of the body, like for example, lungs, we have 2 sides of the lungs. I don't think that one side of our brain is working one lung and one's working the other lung. The spinal cord, right, and that bottom part of it is telling the lungs to breathe, and I think that's a universal message. I think. Again, I'm not a neuro expert, but certain things, like we may have two of them, but it's the same part of the brain functioning, both of them, because our lungs don't work separately, right? We have two lungs, but they work in unison. So I think they're getting that same bang, right? The brain is going bang, bang, making it breathe. And they're receiving that same message, where with our hands, we can clearly receive two messages, right? That I can open this hand and close that hand, right? I can do things and move them differently. So different parts of my brain are moving those. And just like with our vision, we can see different things too, right? We can close an eye and we can close them, and if they actually work together to create our vision, but they also are separate, right? That if I have my hands way out here, right, I can see, I don't know if you guys can see me, but I can see both of my fingers, but technically only one eye is seeing each finger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, it does cross the body. And then the other way we can look at the brain is we can slice it in half, right? So here is, again, so we're looking at just one of the lobes, right? And this is that corpus callosum, like I talked about, that bridges between the two sides. So we're just seeing one of the hemispheres right now. It's actually the right, because here's the frontal part of our brain, our frontal lobe, and here's the back. And so we cut the brain in half, and we're looking at the right hemisphere. We have all the stuff on the inside, which is so important, right? We have our glands, our pineal gland, our medulla oblongata, the hypothalamus, what's the really big one? I feel like I'm missing one. No, I guess that's it. I thought there was another really big one here. But yep, so all of these things here is what's kind of controlling. So the glands are controlling our chemicals, right? So when we talk about oxytocin, that feeling of joy, right? All those oxytocins, when we talk about dopamine and adrenaline and pheromones, all of that is being produced here in this part of our brain here. And those chemicals affect emotion, feeling, how we respond to stress and anxiety, our overall happiness, and also like emotional, like philosophical and emotional things, like, right? Our personality is all in this part of the brain here too. We scientists still don't have a great understanding of this here. We're making research in it all the time because it's hard to get to it, right? How can you study something that's buried so deep into the brain? We can take dead brains and like slice them open and study it that way, but the brain's already dead. We can take pictures of brains, but even that too, it's really hard to study the brain because we have two types. We have CAT scans, right? CAT scans, and we have MRIs. And one of them, I'm trying to remember which one's which. So basically, scientists can look at two different things. They can look at timing, right? They can see how quickly is the brain responding, or they can look at location. Where is the brain responding? But we cannot yet look at both at the same time. We can't see this part of the brain is firing at this exact moment, right? We have to do a lot of different studies to kind of piece those ideas together. But whenever we do studies on the brain, either using CT, CAT scans, or MRIs, one of them is showing us blood flow. So we know, this part of the brain is being activated. But when is it being activated? We don't know. We can put electrodes over the brain and we can get accurate readings on when things are exploding, but yet we don't necessarily know the exact location. We just know, something fired, they responded to this stimulus and it took this long to respond to it. But we don't know exactly what part of the brain was doing it. Does that make sense? And that's what makes brain research so hard, is because scientists have to choose. Are we interested in where this is happening or when is it happening? But we can't do both at the same time yet because we don't have the technology to pinpoint an exact location with an exact time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, does make sense.
And so that's why this part of our brain is so hard to study. The outside is easier to study because we can put little like electrodes on the surface of the skull, and we can notice when things are firing, when those electrical signals are firing, and where and when, and we can study the outside of our brain pretty well. But when we get to the core of the brain, we can't really study the core of a healthy living brain yet without causing damage, right? And so this is where a lot of scientists are really looking at these things. What is truly causing depression? What is causing anxiety and stress? What is causing bipolar? What is causing schizophrenia, right? And we are, every year, we're getting closer and closer to answering those questions, but a lot of these mysteries are still unknown because of where it's located in the brain and how difficult it is to get there. And just the lack of research too. The big thing to take away here is, again, just all of those things that we're unaware of, right? Like our eyes dilate, right? That we respond to that stimulus. Bright light, eye dilates. Darkness, eye opens up. And we don't control that. But the brain is constantly taking in all that information of, oh, this needs to happen, I'm going to respond. We see delicious food and we start to salivate so we can digest food. Again, that's a subconscious response. The brain sees the food and says, ooh, we're about to eat this food. We need to start digesting this food. Produce saliva now. It's going to help digest food. Heart rate, right? We see something that excites us, our heart rate increases, right? Our body is constantly responding. Our breathing, right? Our breathing increases or decreases based on what we need. All of that digestive process that's happening, all of that's happening subconsciously, just inside our body alone. I mean, there's so many things going on. And that's kind of the biggest takeaway, that this brain, this nervous system, is doing all of these things. Do you remember when we talked about children and how important it is that they develop this? All of this is happening because our brain is telling it to do so. How cool is it? Such an important job. All right, but let's look at some fun things about the brain. I have a video for us to watch here, and it's a little experiment. Are you ready, ladies? Let's watch.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go!
All right, what'd you get?
I got 7.
Okay. Anyone else?
I
I
got
see
8.
like 13.
13?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Did you see anything else that was strange or awkward or weird about the video?
The other team was passing. That's it.
All right. Let's keep watching. Go ahead.
It's just weird that they're like intervention to each other, like white, black, white, black.
Mm-hmm.
The
Okay.
motion of the people in the video, some kind of like that.
Okay. That's.
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Did you see the moonwalking bear?
Say what? No.
You didn't see the moonwalking bear? Let's watch it again.
What the heck?
Oh, okay.
You didn't see the moon? Now, why didn't you see the moonwalking bear?
Because we weren't looking for it.
Because you weren't looking for it.
Because we're
Exactly.
on the white
the ball passing to each other.
Yes, exactly. And so that goes into this idea of consciousness, right? What are we paying attention to? Where's our focus? And our brain, we are only conscious to less than 5% of the stimulus around us. So think about all the stimulus, right? Lights, textures, sounds, emotions, feelings, temperature, all of that stimulus that's coming into our brain picks it up, but we are only paying attention to less than 5% of it. Everything else we're kind of just missing, right? It's just kind of going through and we're not necessarily interacting or picking it up. We might be responding subconsciously, but we're only really focused and paying attention to less than 5% of all of our stimulus. Then, if you want to learn something, you have to make a connection within like 2 minutes. So if you learn something, so you see it, you get that 5%, you then put it in your brain and you say, oh, I need to start making connections. So you like connect, connect, connect. It's like this, it's like that. And then it makes those connections. And then you have to use that information several times. If it's vocabulary, I say 7. You want to use that word 7 times. You want to see it, hear it, say it, and read it 7 times for it to convert into your long-term memory. And that's how our brain works. That is learning. That is memory. Right? How often do we remember something the first time we see it?
Not very often.
Yeah, and so that's another thing about our brain, right? That all of that stimulus is coming on, but we're not necessarily aware of it. We're not paying attention to it. We're not interacting with that stimulus. And it's a really, really small percent of the world that we're actually bringing in. Because think about it, like look around you right now. Think of all the colors that you see, right? All of the sounds that are around you, the lights, the brightness, the temperatures, all of these things that are going on, that small little sound way off in the distance that you're not even really listening to. You're not even paying attention to any of that, right? You're focused on whatever that task is at hand. So when I said count the ball, you got it. You can focus it, but then you're completely unaware of all of the other stimulus that's going on. How cool is that? Pretty cool. All right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Are you ready for test number 2?
Go ahead. Let's
It's
do
going
it.
to be, all right. Test number 2. I will give you 1 minute to memorize this information. So I've given you a symbol, and that symbol represents a letter, right? Symbol, letter, symbol, letter, symbol, letter. There are a group of letters, a group of symbols that represent them. I will give you a minute to memorize them as much as possible. But you can't just write them down because that's cheating. All right, 30 seconds. All right, and time. All right, so we got it. All right, show me. What do we got? Do we know any of these symbols and what letters they could represent?
Some.
Okay, which ones? Which ones, Maurice?
Okay.
We could number them to make it easier.
This one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 is the F.
Okay.
That's the F. And
4 is H. I think 1 is C.
I think 1 is E.
Okay.
one is-
I know they look the same.
But I could be wrong.
I think 9 is G.
All right. Are you ready? This one is not C, and it is not E. This one here is H. Good job. This one here is not F. And this one here is not G. I can't make this up, I'm telling you, right? Like, see? Right? But I only gave you like a minute or two, right? But here's how learning works, right? Learning is about making connections. There are no connections, right? It was just literally just trying to memorize information. You didn't use it, you didn't connect it, you didn't apply it, so it didn't stick into your long-term memory. But if I make a connection, so here's a connection, here's some background knowledge. Do you know this symbol? The hashtag symbol? Yep, the hashtag symbol. Do you know the alphabet? A, B, C, D. We're going to combine those. And so we're going to put like the letter A here, and the letter B, and the letter C, and D, E, F, G, H, and I. So now if you need to know what letter it is, you actually just look at the shape. So A is going to be this shape here, right? So A is this shape. It's the top of that, right? B is going to look like this. There's our B.
Okay.
Here's our C. So A, B, C, D, E is going to be our box, right? F looks like this here. Do we see the connection in the pattern?
It
Now,
makes more sense
You
now.
trick us, Chan. You
now,
trick us.
I tricked you. I tricked you.
Yeah, you
So
trick
now,
us.
now tell me, what letter is it? What letter is this? Think about your connection, right? Make those connections in your brain. What letter?
B. B.
What B? Remember.
B. That's B.
F.
F.
Yeah, it's going to be F, right?
F. Yeah.
And the
F.
next one?
A.
A.
And the next one?
G.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that would be G.
H.
H.
E.
And this one's I. Yep, and this one's E. This one?
B.
B.
D.
B. C.
C. So we're C
D.
and D. Perfect. So what I did is I made a connection, right? I made that pattern, right? That you know this symbol, you know the alphabet, you now see that there's a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So then you can make that connection. It's no longer just memorizing. And this, because of making that connection, stores it into your long-term memory. I could ask you about this a week from now and you would know it. And it took the same amount of time, right? I said, look at this and memorize it. Same amount of time for me to explain the connection and make those connections into your brain. And now it's tapped into your long-term memory and it'll be there forever. How cool is that? So again, going back to the idea of the brain and learning and thinking about you as students, right? You as medical students, the more connections you can make, the longer you will remember something, right? The more you can make those connections to images, to sounds, connecting to other words you already know, breaking them apart, finding that common root word and say, oh, cardio is like cardiovascular, like cardiologist. Like, you know, I mean, the more connections you can make, the more you will learn that information and store it into long-term memory. Because that context, finding patterns and formulas is vital for understanding. Because it's going to feel like this, right? You're going to get a list of vocabulary words in CNA program. You're going to get a list of acronyms in CNA program. And it's going to be this huge list. And you're like, I'm just going to sit here and memorize it. Well, you could, but it'd be more effective if you try to find a pattern and a connection. The more patterns and connections you can find, the quicker and faster and more effective you will learn it. Because that's how our brain works. Our brain is this neural network of connections. We love connections. And the more connections we can create, it creates what's called a neural pathway, and it's solidified and it's built in there, and our brain will hold on to it. All right. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is our circulatory system. Really quick, common health problems. We have dementia, Alzheimer's, Stroke, I included in the brain because, again, it's that lack of blood flow in our brain. Tell me about dementia and Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's is that forgetting?
Yes. So they both have to do with forgetting.
Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, isn't it?
Dementia is kind of like step 1. Alzheimer's is more severe, step 2. So dementia is like, I'm forgetting things. Like, where did I put my keys? Where did I do this? And like, Alzheimer's, it's like, I don't even know what year it is anymore. So Alzheimer's is very severe where they often don't know where they are. They don't know what year it is. They can see family members and not know who they are. Or for some reason, their brain may be in the past, like in 1920, right? And that when they see a family member, they think it might be a younger child, or like, or they might think it's like a dad when really it's their son. That there's a lot of things going on with their memory and their brain holding on to all of those connections. So these are both dealing with memory, and a lot of them also have to do with aging, that as we get older, the brain often develops dementia where we're losing those neural networks, and Alzheimer's is like a severe loss of those neural networks in memory. All right. Now, when we look at autism spectrum disorder, this is also a neurological condition, right? It deals with the brain and the neurons. And so when we look at some of the warning signs with autism, right? The idea of delayed speech, the rejection of not touching, that hyperactivity, we often see it's related to stimulus, right? Lights, sounds, textures, social interactions, and they're often too much. A person with ASD often describes lights are brighter, right? They're too bright. Sounds are loud and annoying, and I don't like it. Textures are rough and scratchy and uncomfortable. And social interactions, there's all these rules, right? There's all these social cues of you shake hands, you wave, you say this. Like you meet somebody and you say, how are you? Even though you really don't care how they're doing, you still ask it, and the answer is fine. Even if it's not fine, you still say fine because it's rude to say I'm doing terrible, right? There's all of these like social interactions that just overwhelms their brain. And then like the supercomputer, it overheats, it melts down, and it falls apart. And that's where we see these like violent outbursts, right? That we see their brain just kind of shuts down, and it's just, I can't do this. And you see the rocking back and forth, the hitting of the head, and it's their brain overwhelming. And so people with autism actually make more neural connections. Their brain is firing in more places at a higher frequency than atypical brains.
That's why they're more intelligent.
Neurotypical.
Most of the time.
And some are, right? Yep. And especially when we see on that higher functioning spectrum, like the Asperger's, right? They often, it's kind of a thing of like, wow, they're super smart because they're able to hyper focus on an activity and make those connections and remember them, where they might have a specialization or this field that they've researched and read and they love it and they're super passionate about it, and they come across as this like knowledgeable expert because they're making connections and they're making them faster. So it's a superpower, but it's also a disadvantage because just like that supercomputer, it overheats and it melts down. And that's why the actual temperature of an autistic brain increases. So when they're making all of these connections and they get overwhelmed and they get confused and they don't understand what's going on, the temperature of their brain increases and eventually shuts off. And that's when they enter that state of, I'm just rocking back and forth, hitting my head, having what's called a flare up or a meltdown. And they don't, like, their body just is trying to eliminate as much stimulus as possible for it to come back to homeostasis. And it is a neurological condition, not caused by vaccines. Just gonna throw that one out there. There's very little correlation between vaccines and autism. Why the anti-vaxxers thinks vaccines are causing autism, we don't know. It is a neurological condition in the brain. And so here's kind of a diagram to show like you have this interaction, right? That they're doing a hand gesture that they're having to interpret. They have this facial expression that you have to interpret, and then the spoken language. Hey, how are you? And he's like, oh, and he's like making all these connections, right? All of these thoughts are going on in their brain all at the same time, which then really overwhelms them, which then also means that they lose certain things, right? They don't pick up on certain cues. They don't see certain stimulus that we see, which makes them, a lot of people say they're socially awkward, right? That they're not fully there because their brain is elsewhere making all of these connections. A great example, you hear hooves off in the distance. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. What do you think it is? Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Like a running animal, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Hooves hitting the
Horses
ground.
or
Horses,
zebras.
right? Most people would say horses, right? Because that's just kind of
Yeah.
a logical, high probability. A person on autism really freaks out with that type of a question because they're like, how am I supposed to know? There are so many options. It could be a zebra, it could be a deer, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. And their brain starts firing, thinking of all the different probabilities that that outcome can be, and get to the point of like, how do you know? There's no way of knowing. But a neurotypical brain would just say, it's probably a horse. That's a good guess. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Another one, we looked at the development of children, of that story of the sandwich. I don't know if you remember the story of the sandwich, of like the pirate, right? That he laid a sandwich and then he went back and then it fell
Yeah.
down and another sandwich is there, and he came back and it was like, well, which one's the sandwich? We know that he's going to look for where he left his sandwich. A person on autism really struggles with that idea because they know which one is his sandwich. And they say, no, he should choose this one because that's his sandwich. I know it's his sandwich. How is it possible that he doesn't know that's his sandwich because I know it's his sandwich? That's his sandwich. He will pick up his sandwich. That's not his sandwich. And it's hard for them to see that other perspective of he doesn't know that it's not his sandwich. And that's another thing that a brain with autism often struggles with too. But autism is also a full spectrum, right? That it's hard to talk about autism because it is this full spectrum of very, very severe behaviors to less severe behaviors. And we use the same term, autism, to represent this whole spectrum of people. But that's also another neurological issue and condition. So this is the nervous system. So to wrap up, I know it's 12:08. This was our human anatomy section, right? We looked at the bones, joints, and tissues. We looked at the respiratory and the digestive, and now we did the cardiovascular and the nervous system of the human body and anatomy. Next week, we're going to move on to medical terminology. All right, any questions, ladies? I'll stop our
Nope.
recording here.